Hey guys, tonight you step quietly into the warm, crowded streets of ancient Rome, where the evening air carries the smell of freshly baked bread, wood smoke, olives, herbs, and something intensely salty drifting from a nearby kitchen. Lanterns flicker against worn stone walls. Sandals scrape across the pavement. Somewhere behind a doorway, someone is arguing about the price of grain, while from another house comes the clatter of bowls and the low murmur of a family settling down for the evening meal. You are hungry. Not modern, casually hungry, where you can open a refrigerator and find 6 things you forgot you bought. You are genuinely dependent on what the market offered today, what your household could afford, and what survived the journey into the city. And tonight, you are going to eat like a Roman. That sounds glamorous at first. You might imagine marble dining rooms, roasted meats, expensive wine, exotic spices, and enormous banquets where wealthy guests recline on couches, while servants carry endless dishes around the room. Ancient Rome certainly had all of that, but most Romans were not wealthy aristocrats. For you, an ordinary evening is much more likely to involve bread, porridge, vegetables, olives, legumes, and perhaps a little fish or meat if circumstances are kind. The food can be filling, flavorful, and surprisingly sophisticated, but it can also be repetitive, heavily salted, difficult to preserve, and deeply dependent on your position in society. So yes, you probably won't survive this dinner with your modern expectations completely intact. And before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is. It is always strangely comforting to imagine sleepy listeners scattered across different places, quietly discovering ancient history at completely different hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by standing outside a modest Roman home as the last daylight slips away. The city around you is still busy, because Rome rarely seems interested in giving anyone complete silence. Voices echo between buildings. Vendors are finishing their work. Animals move through narrow streets. Doors open and close. Somewhere nearby, a baker is still tending an oven. You follow the smell of food. Inside, there is no gleaming modern kitchen. There are no electric lights, refrigerators, sealed containers, or convenient shelves filled with neatly packaged ingredients. Food preparation depends on fire, sunlight, storage jars, knives, grinding stones, wooden utensils, clay vessels, and human hands. Everything takes effort. Even something as ordinary as bread begins long before you sit down to eat it. Grain has to be grown, harvested, processed, transported, ground into flour, mixed, kneaded, and baked. Behind the loaf sitting on your table is an enormous network of farmers, laborers, millers, merchants, bakers, animals, carts, roads, warehouses, and markets. You rarely think about any of that while chewing. Tonight, you start to. The Roman diet is also shaped by geography. The empire stretches across enormous distances, and Rome sits at the center of a complicated food system. Grain can arrive from distant provinces. Olive oil comes from productive Mediterranean regions. Wine travels enormous distances. Fish products, spices, fruits, and other ingredients move through ports and markets. The Mediterranean is effectively your pantry. But transportation is slow. There are no refrigerated trucks rushing through the night. There are no instant deliveries. A storm can delay ships. A poor harvest can push prices upward. Political trouble can interfere with supply routes. A shortage somewhere far away can eventually become your problem at the dinner table. That makes your meal feel less certain. You look down at the food in front of you, and suddenly every bowl seems connected to something much larger. The bread connects you to the harvest. The olives connect you to the groves. The oil connects you to farmers and presses. The fish sauce connects you to fishermen, salt, barrels, and long-established techniques of preservation. Even the water and wine have their own stories. And then there is your social position. This may be the most important ingredient of all. If you are wealthy, food can become a performance. You can afford servants, better ingredients, imported luxuries, elaborate dishes, and large quantities. You can turn dinner into entertainment. If you are poor, dinner is much more practical. You eat what is affordable. You make things stretch. You rely on staples that can feed a household without emptying the purse. That difference is easy to miss when people talk about Roman food, as though every Roman sat down to the same table. They did not. The empire contained emperors and laborers, senators and street vendors, merchants and farmers, soldiers and slaves. Their meals could look completely different. So tonight, you are not simply learning what Romans ate. You are stepping into the uncomfortable question of who got to eat what. The room grows darker, a small flame flickers nearby, and the shadows move across the walls. Your meal is still simple, but you begin to understand that simplicity does not necessarily mean ease. Every ingredient has a history. Every shortage has consequences. Every feast has workers behind it. And every ordinary bowl of grain represents an entire civilization trying to feed millions of people. You take your first bite. It is not terrible. It is not magical either. It is simply food. And that, strangely enough, may be the most interesting part. Because beneath the famous Roman banquets, beneath the stories of emperors and extravagant hosts, there was an enormous population eating ordinary meals every day, trying to stay fed in one of the most complicated cities the ancient world had ever seen. Tonight, you will follow that meal from the grain fields to the bakery, from the market to the kitchen, from the humble household to the luxurious dining room. And slowly, as the city settles into darkness, you will discover the brutal truth about ancient Roman food. It was not simply about taste. It was about survival, status, labor, preservation, money, geography, and luck. For now, though, you remain seated in the warm little room. The bowl is in front of you. The bread is within reach. Outside, Rome continues breathing through the night. And your dinner has only just begun. The bread in front of you looks almost disappointingly ordinary. It is round, slightly uneven, and darker than the perfectly pale loaves you might find in a modern supermarket. Its surface is firm, its inside dense, and there is a faint smell of smoke from the oven where it was baked. But in ancient Rome, bread is never just bread. You lift the loaf and feel its weight in your hand. For a moment, it seems almost too simple to deserve much attention. Yet this little object connects you to fields stretching far beyond the city, to farmers bending beneath the Mediterranean sun, to mills grinding grain day after day, to bakers working near roaring ovens, and finally to millions of people who depend on the same basic food. Rome needs grain. Lot of grain. And because you are standing inside the capital of a vast empire, feeding people is one of the greatest logistical challenges imaginable. You take another look at the loaf. There is nothing wrapped around it. No label tells you where the wheat came from. No date tells you when it was baked. No convenient storage instructions explain what to do with it tomorrow. If you want bread, somebody has to make it. And before somebody can make it, somebody has to grow the grain. So imagine yourself leaving the crowded city behind and traveling outward, away from the apartment blocks, temples, markets, and monuments. The streets gradually become quieter. Buildings thin out. The smell of smoke fades behind you. Soon, the landscape opens into farmland. Here, the story of your dinner really begins. You see fields of grain moving gently in the wind. Workers are scattered across them, harvesting under the bright Mediterranean sun. Their tools are basic. Their work is physical. There is no roaring combine harvester passing through the field in minutes. Harvesting grain takes time. Human time. Animal time. An enormous amount of patience. You watch as grain is cut, gathered, processed, and collected. Some of it will eventually travel toward large cities. Some will remain closer to the farms where it was produced. Much depends on local conditions, transportation, markets, taxation, and demand. And Rome is always hungry. The city is enormous by ancient standards. Hundreds of thousands of people live there, perhaps more depending on the period and estimate. Every day, all those people need food. That means grain cannot simply be a local product. It has to move. You imagine sacks and containers traveling by cart along dusty roads. You imagine warehouses filled with grain. You imagine ships crossing the Mediterranean with enormous quantities of food packed into their holds. The sea becomes part of your dinner table. This is one of the strange things about ancient Roman food. When you eat bread in Rome, you may be eating the product of a food system that reaches far beyond the walls around you. Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, and other productive regions become important suppliers of grain at different times. The Roman state developed systems to manage grain supplies and distribute food, particularly to the urban population. For ordinary people, the availability and price of grain can make the difference between a comfortable week and a very difficult one. You begin to understand why bread matters so much. It is cheap enough to serve as a staple. It stores reasonably well. It can be carried. It can be eaten with almost anything. And it fills your stomach. That last quality is especially important. You are not eating for Instagram. There is no photograph of your dinner. Nobody is going to compliment the presentation. You want calories. You want something that keeps hunger away. Bread does that beautifully. Back in the city, you follow the grain to a mill. The building is noisy. You hear stone grinding against stone. A worker feeds grain into the mill while another manages the process. Flour gathers in containers below. Dust floats through the air, catching the sunlight. You can feel it in your nose. You cough. The miller barely notices. This is his workplace, and it is not particularly comfortable. Ancient milling could involve heavy labor, depending on the technology and scale. Large mills could use animal power or other mechanisms, while smaller operations relied on manual work. Either way, the grain must be transformed. You watch the kernels disappear beneath the grinding stones. What was once a field becomes flour, and flour becomes dough. You follow it to the bakery. Now the smell changes. The air is warmer, much warmer. You feel the heat before you reach the oven. Inside, bakers work around wooden tables and large clay or brick ovens. Dough is being mixed and shaped. Loaves are prepared for baking. Flour dust hangs in the air. There is something comforting about the smell. Even in the ancient world, freshly baked bread must have been difficult to resist. You watch a loaf being pulled from the oven. Steam rises. The crust is browned. You are suddenly very hungry again. But before you take it, you notice something else. The bread is not identical for everyone. The Roman world had different kinds and qualities of bread, and access to better quality flour could depend on wealth. The more refined the flour, the more processing was required to remove bran and other parts of the grain. Wealthier Romans could afford finer bread. Poorer people might eat darker, coarser varieties. So even something as basic as bread can reveal social hierarchy. You look at the loaf in your hand again. It is no longer just food. It is evidence. Evidence of your income. Evidence of the agricultural system. Evidence of the labor that produced it. And sometimes, evidence of how well the city is doing. If grain supplies are disrupted, people notice. If prices rise, people notice. If harvests fail, people notice. The emperor notices too. Food supply is not merely a household problem. It can become a political problem. A hungry population is unhappy. A city with expensive grain becomes unstable. So grain becomes part of the machinery of Roman government. You do not need to understand every administrative detail to feel the importance of it. You simply need to imagine being hungry. Imagine walking into a market and discovering that the price of grain has risen. Your coins have not increased. Your appetite has not decreased. The loaf in front of you has suddenly become harder to afford. That is the brutal simplicity of food economics. You cannot negotiate with hunger. And yet, despite all these difficulties, Rome manages to feed a vast population for generations. The system is imperfect. It depends on weather. It depends on transport. It depends on political stability. It depends on people working constantly. But it works often enough to keep the city alive. You return to the bakery. The noise of grinding grain has faded behind you. The evening is approaching again. You carry your bread home. It is heavier than it looked earlier. Perhaps because now you understand what it represents. You break off a piece. The crust cracks softly. You chew. It is dense, slightly smoky and filling. You realize that this is exactly what a staple food should be. Not glamorous, not exotic, reliable. For most ordinary Romans, that reliability matters more than luxury. Bread can be dipped into oil. It can accompany vegetables. It can be eaten with beans. It can soak up sauces. It can become the foundation of a meal that changes according to whatever else happens to be available. And if there is not much else available, bread can still be dinner. You sit quietly for a moment. Outside, Rome continues its endless movement. Somewhere, a wealthy household is preparing an extravagant meal. Somewhere else, a poor family is stretching a small amount of food across several people. And between those two worlds sits the humble loaf. The same basic ingredient feeds both, but the quality, quantity, and company surrounding it can be completely different. You take another bite. The city grows darker. The oil lamp beside you flickers, and now you understand why bread was everything. Because before the sauces, before the spices, before the meat, before the elaborate Roman banquets, there was grain. There was the field. There was the mill. There was the oven. And finally, there was you, sitting at the end of that enormous chain with a piece of bread in your hand. The bread has barely cooled when you realize that eating it was the easy part. Getting it onto the table was the real work. You sit near the small cooking fire and watch the flames shift beneath a clay pot. Smoke curls upward, searching for somewhere to escape. Your eyes sting slightly. You blink. The cook beside you does not seem impressed by your discomfort. This is simply what a kitchen smells like. There is no extractor fan humming overhead, no clean electric stove waiting for you, no refrigerator quietly preserving yesterday's leftovers, no tap delivering hot water whenever you feel like washing your hands. There is fire. There are pots. There are knives. There are bowls. And there is you. That is more or less the equipment. The kitchen is small, dark, warm, smoky, and busy. You look around and begin noticing how much of modern cooking depends on invisible conveniences. You turn a switch, and the room becomes bright. You open a refrigerator, and food remains cold. You turn a knob, and the flame becomes larger or smaller. You reach for a packaged ingredient, already cleaned and prepared. Here, almost everything requires a physical action. The fire must be started. The fuel must be gathered. The water must be carried. The ingredients must be cleaned. The grain must be ground. The vegetables must be chopped. The pot must be watched. And if something burns, there is no convenient replacement sitting inside a cupboard. You stare at the hearth. It is both useful and dangerous. Fire gives you warmth and allows you to cook, but it also fills the room with smoke and requires constant attention. A careless moment can ruin food or create a much more serious problem. The ancient Roman kitchen is therefore a place of heat, smell, noise, and labor. You hear a wooden spoon scraping the inside of a clay pot. You hear someone carrying water. You hear the crackle of fuel. You hear the faint hiss of something cooking. It is strangely comforting and uncomfortable, both at once. The Roman kitchen could take different forms depending on the household. Wealthier homes might have dedicated cooking spaces, while poorer urban residents could have far less convenient arrangements. In crowded apartment buildings, cooking could be particularly complicated. You imagine living several floors above the street. You have food. You have a pot. You have fuel. But getting everything where it needs to go is already an inconvenience. And smoke has nowhere to hide. You cough again. The cook gives you a look that seems to say, "Welcome to Rome." You decide not to complain. Instead, you watch. A pot is placed over the fire. Inside are vegetables and other ingredients. There is no precise temperature setting, no timer, no recipe card telling you that the food should cook for exactly 17 minutes at a certain heat. Experience matters. The cook knows the fire. They know the ingredients. They know when something looks ready. This kind of knowledge is difficult to measure, but it is extremely valuable. You realize that ancient cooking is less about following instructions and more about recognizing conditions. Is the fire too hot? Is the pot too close to the flame? Does the liquid need more water? Is the food becoming too dry? Does the sauce need more seasoning? You cannot simply press a button and wait. You have to watch. And because you have to watch, cooking becomes part of daily life. It takes attention. You notice another problem. Water. Today, you probably take clean water for granted. You turn on a tap. Here, water must be collected, carried, stored, and managed. Rome has impressive water infrastructure, including aqueducts and distribution systems, but access and household arrangements vary. Even when water is available nearby, moving it around still requires containers and human effort. You see someone carrying a heavy ceramic vessel. You imagine doing that every day, not once, not for a historical reenactment. Every day. Your shoulders would eventually have an opinion about it, and your opinion would probably be rude. The kitchen continues. Someone brings vegetables. Another person brings a jar of oil. Bread sits nearby. A bowl of legumes is being prepared. The ingredients are simple, but the process is not. This is something modern descriptions of ancient food sometimes overlook. A meal may appear simple on the table because the ingredients are simple. That does not mean preparing it was simple. Take a humble vegetable. You need to grow it or buy it. You need to clean it. You need to cut it. You need fuel. You need a cooking vessel. You need time. And you need somebody to do all of that work. The final dish might look like nothing more than vegetables in a bowl, but the labor behind that bowl is substantial. You watch as the cook adds oil. The smell changes immediately. It becomes richer. Olive oil is one of the defining ingredients of Mediterranean cooking, and in the Roman world it is used in many ways, from cooking to seasoning and other household purposes. The oil glistens on the surface. You dip a piece of bread into it. That simple combination is suddenly satisfying. You begin to understand why Roman food does not have to be complicated to be flavorful. Good ingredients help. Salt helps. Herbs help. Oil helps. And one particular Roman ingredient will soon make itself impossible to ignore. But for now, the kitchen remains your world. You look at the walls. They are not spotless. There are signs of smoke. There are marks from years of use. This is not a showroom. It is a working space. The floor has seen countless meals. The pots have been used again and again. The wooden tools have been handled by generations of people. There is something intimate about that. Modern kitchens can be beautiful, but ancient kitchens are deeply connected to survival. You cook because you need to eat. You preserve because food cannot always be replaced. You store because tomorrow's market may not have what you need. You save leftovers because wasting food makes little sense when resources are limited. Even the simplest meal carries this logic. You look at the clay pot. It is not disposable. It is not replaced because a newer model appeared. It is repaired, reused, and passed through continued daily service. The same is true of many containers. Clay jars are everywhere. They hold oil. They hold wine. They hold sauces. They hold grains and other foods. Some are large. Some are small. Each one has a purpose. You notice that storage is just as important as cooking. Without refrigeration, preservation becomes essential. Drying, salting, fermenting, pickling, storing foods in suitable containers. All of these techniques help extend the life of ingredients. And then there is timing. You cannot expect strawberries to remain perfect for weeks. You cannot store fresh meat indefinitely. You cannot simply decide to keep everything until next month. Seasonality matters. Availability matters. Weather matters. Your menu is partly determined by what the world is willing to provide. That makes dinner feel less predictable. You sit back. The room is warm. The fire pops softly. The smell of cooking fills the air. For a moment you forget that you are supposed to be uncomfortable. The meal is actually beginning to look appealing. And perhaps that is the point. Ancient Roman food was not necessarily miserable. It could be delicious. It could be inventive. It could be deeply satisfying. The brutal part was not that every Roman meal tasted terrible. The brutal part was how much effort stood between hunger and dinner. You cannot simply decide you want pasta at midnight. You cannot order something from another continent. You cannot put leftovers into a refrigerator and forget them for 3 days. You work with what you have, and then you eat it. You watch the cook lift the lid from the pot. Steam rises into the smoky air. The smell makes your stomach tighten with anticipation. You lean closer. The firelight catches the edge of the clay vessel. Outside, the city continues to move. Inside, dinner is almost ready. And as you wait, you begin to appreciate something surprisingly modern. Convenience is a luxury. You just never notice it when you have it. By now, you have begun to notice something about Roman food. It is not particularly mysterious. It is not always extravagant, and for most people, it is built from ingredients that are surprisingly familiar. Grain, legumes, vegetables, olives, oil, fruit, bread, sometimes fish, sometimes meat, sometimes a little wine. The difference is that everything arrives without the conveniences you expect. You sit down again at the modest table, and the meal looks almost plain. There is a bowl of cooked legumes, a few vegetables, some olives, a piece of bread, a little oil. Nothing here would impress a modern restaurant critic. But you are not trying to impress anyone. You are trying to eat. And for an ordinary Roman, that is the point. The foundation of the diet is grain. Bread is especially important in urban areas, where people depend heavily on purchased food. But grain can also appear in porridges and other preparations. You look into the bowl in front of you. It is thick, warm, plain, and surprisingly filling. This kind of food has one major advantage. It stretches. A small amount of grain can become a substantial meal when combined with water and cooked into a porridge. You begin to understand why such foods matter in a world where calories cannot simply be summoned from a supermarket shelf. Then there are legumes. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, and related foods can provide an important source of nourishment. They are relatively practical foods, especially compared with expensive animal products. You taste the lentils. They are soft, earthy, not unpleasant. You add a little olive oil. Much better. Then you add some seasoning. Better still. Suddenly the meal feels less boring. This is where Roman cooking becomes interesting. The ingredients may be simple, but flavor does not have to be. Herbs can change a dish. Oil can enrich it. Salt can preserve and season food. Sauces can transform basic ingredients. And later you will encounter one Roman seasoning that seems to appear everywhere. But for now, you are still learning the everyday menu. Vegetables matter too. The Roman world contains a wide range of cultivated and gathered plants, and what appears on your table depends on region, season, availability, and wealth. You might encounter leafy greens, onions, leeks, cabbages, turnips, cucumbers, carrots or similar roots, and many other vegetables. Some are eaten fresh. Some are cooked. Some are preserved. Some are combined with grains or legumes to make a meal more substantial. You pick up an olive. It is small, dark, salty. You bite into it. The flavor is intense. You immediately understand why olives are so useful. They can be eaten by themselves. They can accompany bread. They can be pressed for oil. They can be preserved. One little fruit can serve several purposes. And olive oil becomes one of the great foundations of Mediterranean cooking. You dip your bread into it. The texture changes. The bread becomes richer. A little salt adds another layer. Suddenly, your simple dinner is no longer completely plain. You begin to realize that Roman cooks were not trying to recreate modern restaurant dishes. They were working with what their environment offered, and they were very good at making those ingredients useful. Now you look at the fruit. Depending on the season and region, Roman tables could include grapes, figs, dates, apples, pears, plums, pomegranates, and other fruits. Some were eaten fresh. Others could be dried or preserved. Dried fruit is especially practical. It can survive longer than fresh fruit and provide sweetness when sugar as a modern pantry staple is not available in the same way. You take a dried fig. It is soft and intensely sweet. For a moment, it feels almost like dessert. And that is another important difference. Modern food culture often separates meals into neat categories: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, dessert. Ancient eating habits could be more flexible. Foods could be combined according to circumstances. A meal did not necessarily follow the rigid structure you might expect from a modern restaurant. The Roman table is practical. You eat what is available. You eat what you can afford. You eat what your household has prepared. And if something is particularly good, you eat more of it. There is no need to overcomplicate the system. You look around the room. This modest household has no reason to waste food. That is another reality you need to remember. Food has value because producing it requires labor. A loaf of bread contains agricultural labor. A bowl of lentils represents farming, processing, cooking, and fuel. An olive represents years of growth and seasonal harvesting. A jar of oil represents pressing and storage. Nothing appears by magic. So waste is not merely environmentally unfortunate. It can be economically painful. Leftovers may be used again. Stale bread can still be eaten. Ingredients can be combined in different ways. a meal can evolve. You imagine yesterday's vegetables becoming part of today's dish. You imagine bread being softened with other ingredients. You imagine cooks learning to use nearly everything available. That does not mean Romans never wasted food. Wealthy households could certainly display abundance and excess. But for ordinary families, stretching food makes practical sense. The distinction between rich and poor keeps returning. You cannot escape it. At the wealthy end of Roman society, food can become entertainment. At the ordinary end, food is often simply nourishment. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine two dining rooms. In one, a wealthy host has ordered an impressive spread. Servants move constantly. There are multiple courses. Guests recline and talk. Fine vessels sit on the table. The meal is designed to be remembered. In the other room, a family shares bread, legumes, vegetables, and olives. Nobody is performing. Nobody is impressed. They simply need dinner. Both meals are Roman. That is why saying Romans ate this can be misleading. Which Romans? A senator? A merchant? A soldier? A city laborer? A farmer? A slave? A wealthy woman? A child? The answer changes. Even within the same household, meals can vary according to age, work, health, and circumstance. You return to your own bowl. It is not luxurious, but it is enough, and enough is a powerful concept when food is not guaranteed. You eat slowly. The warm food settles your stomach. The room feels quieter now. Outside, the streets are still active, but inside this little home, dinner has become a moment of rest. You realize that the ordinary Roman diet was not necessarily a punishment. It could be nutritious in many circumstances. It could be flavorful. It could be varied depending on region and season. But it demanded adaptation. You ate according to the agricultural calendar. You preserved what could not be eaten immediately. You relied on staples. You adjusted when prices changed. And you accepted that some foods simply would not be available all year. Today, if you want strawberries in winter, you might find them. If you want mangoes, you can probably buy them. If you want cheese from another country, it may already be waiting in a store. In ancient Rome, distance had teeth. A food grown hundreds of miles away had to travel. A ship had to cross the sea. A merchant had to arrange the transaction. A road had to remain usable. A harvest had to exist. Weather had to cooperate. By the time the food reached your table, many things could have gone wrong. That makes the ingredients in your bowl feel more valuable. You lift another olive. You eat it, then another. The meal is simple, but you are beginning to understand the genius of simplicity. When your ingredients are limited, you learn how to combine them. When fuel is expensive or difficult to gather, you learn efficient cooking. When food must last, you learn preservation. When money is limited, you learn how to stretch staples. And when you live beside a Mediterranean filled with olive groves, vineyards, grain fields, and fishing grounds, you build a cuisine around them. The Roman diet is therefore not one recipe. It is an entire system, a system shaped by land, sea, climate, trade, wealth, labor, and habit. You finish the last piece of bread. There is still a little oil left in the bowl. You wipe it up with another small piece. It is a surprisingly satisfying ending. The fire burns lower. The kitchen grows quieter. And for the first time tonight, you understand why the everyday Roman table deserves as much attention as the famous banquet. Because civilization is not built only by emperors. It is built by ordinary people eating ordinary meals. Every single day, you thought you understood Roman seasoning. Then the jar arrives. It is small, plain, ceramic. Nothing about it looks particularly important. Yet this little container holds one of the most distinctive flavors of Roman cuisine. You watch as the cook reaches for it. A thin stream of dark liquid pours into the pot. The smell changes immediately. Salty, savory, deep, a little strange. You lean closer. This is garum, or perhaps a related fish sauce, depending on the household, region, and quality. And if you have spent your entire life imagining ancient Romans eating bland food, this is the moment that assumption begins to fall apart. Because Roman cooks had a powerful secret. They knew how to make simple ingredients taste much more complicated. Fish sauce was one of their tools. You stare at the jar. You are probably wondering what it actually is. The basic idea is surprisingly practical. Small fish and fish parts could be layered with salt and allowed to ferment. Over time, the mixture broke down and produced a strong, salty liquid. The resulting sauce could be strained and used as a seasoning. It sounds strange to you. To Romans, it could be completely normal. You imagine opening a modern refrigerator and seeing a bottle of fish sauce. You might recognize it immediately if you have encountered cuisines that still use similar fermented sauces. But imagine encountering the concept without modern food packaging, without refrigeration, and without a supermarket aisle explaining exactly what you are holding. Instead, you simply know that a small amount of this dark liquid can transform a meal. That makes it valuable. You watch the cook add only a little. Not much is needed. The sauce is intensely flavored. A few drops can change the entire character of a dish. The lentils taste different. The vegetables taste different. Even the bread seems more interesting when combined with food seasoned this way. You begin to understand why ancient cooks valued concentrated ingredients. When food itself is relatively simple, a strong seasoning can make it more satisfying. And Roman food was not built around a huge number of modern ingredients. There were no refrigerators full of sauces. There were no supermarkets filled with dozens of spice blends. There were no bottles with printed labels telling you which one pairs with chicken. Instead, cooks learned through experience: salt, herbs, oil, wine, vinegar, spices, and fermented sauces. Together, they could create an impressive range of flavors. Garum becomes especially fascinating because it exists at many levels of Roman society. There could be different qualities and grades. A luxury version might be expensive and carefully produced. More ordinary varieties could be cheaper. The exact terminology and production methods could vary, but the broader idea remains the same. Fish sauce is not simply one sauce. It is part of an entire industry. You imagine coastal production centers where fish are processed, salted, fermented, and stored. The smell must have been powerful. Very powerful. You decide not to investigate that part too closely. Some historical experiences are better appreciated from a respectful distance. The sauce is useful because fermentation is one of the great technologies of the ancient kitchen. Before modern refrigeration, fermentation allows people to transform ingredients into something that lasts longer and develops a different flavor. It is not just about taste. It is about preservation. And preservation is survival. If you live beside the sea, fish can be abundant, but fresh fish does not remain fresh forever. Salt changes that equation. You can preserve fish products and transport them. You can turn something highly perishable into something that can travel across the empire. Now your little jar becomes part of the Roman trade network. Fish comes from the coast. Salt comes from salt-producing areas. Containers are manufactured. Workers process the ingredients. Merchants transport the finished product. Restaurants, households, and wealthy villas purchase it. And eventually, a cook pours a small amount into your dinner. The empire appears at your table again. You taste the dish. It is stronger than before. You can understand why people liked it. There is a savory depth that makes basic ingredients more interesting. The sauce does not necessarily dominate everything. Used carefully, it becomes part of the background. You imagine a Roman cook preparing vegetables. The vegetables are fresh. The oil is good. The herbs are fragrant. The sauce adds salt and depth. Suddenly, an inexpensive meal feels much more complete. This is an important reminder. Cheap food does not have to mean flavorless food. The ancient world had limited technology compared with ours, but people were not lacking intelligence. They experimented. They observed. They preserved. They refined techniques. They learned which ingredients work together. And they passed that knowledge down. You look at the jar again. It is almost funny how something so ordinary could have become such an important part of Roman cuisine. But there is another side. Salt is not free. Fish products require labor. High-quality sauces can be expensive. So once again, wealth matters. A wealthy Roman might have access to premium ingredients and carefully prepared sauces. An ordinary household might use more basic versions. The same basic concept exists at different economic levels. Food is never only about what exists. It is also about what you can afford. You dip your bread into the seasoned dish. The taste is intense. You take another bite. Not bad. Actually, very good. You begin wondering what else Roman cooks did with this sauce. The answer is almost everything. It could be used with vegetables, with legumes, with fish, with meat, with sauces, with other prepared dishes. It could function as a seasoning, much as salt or other savory condiments do in various cuisines today. This flexibility helps explain its popularity. You do not need a complicated recipe. You need a little sauce, and suddenly yesterday's leftovers can taste different. That matters in an ordinary household. Food can be stretched. Ingredients can be reused. Flavor can prevent repetition from becoming unbearable. You look around the kitchen. The jar sits beside other containers. Oil, vinegar, herbs, salt. The Roman cook's toolkit is beginning to make sense. The cuisine is not primitive. It is practical. It is adapted to the available ingredients and technology. And it has one very strong preference: make the food taste good. You smile. After all, perhaps Romans were not so different from you. If someone discovers a cheap way to make dinner taste better, you probably want to know about it too. The difference is that their breakthrough comes in a ceramic jar. Outside, the city is dark now. The streets are quieter. The smell of cooking still hangs in the air. Somewhere near the coast, fish sauce is still being produced. Somewhere in a market, a merchant is selling it. Somewhere in a wealthy villa, a servant is adding an expensive version to an elaborate dish. And somewhere in a modest home, a cook adds just enough to make a simple bowl of lentils taste satisfying. You take your final bite. The meal is no longer bland. It is salty, savory, oily, herbal, and unmistakably ancient. You set the spoon down. The little jar remains on the table. You look at it with new respect. This is one of the secrets behind Roman food. Not endless luxury, not mountains of meat, not extravagant desserts. Sometimes, it is simply knowing how to turn a humble bowl into something worth eating. And as the fire burns lower, you begin to realize that the next question is even more interesting. If Romans had such elaborate cooking traditions, how often did ordinary people actually get to eat meat? The answer is not quite what you might expect. You have spent the evening learning how much flavor a Roman cook can create from humble ingredients. Now you look toward the most tempting possibility on the table: meat. It has always carried a certain reputation. When people imagine ancient Roman food, they often picture enormous roasted animals arriving at extravagant banquets, surrounded by servants and wealthy guests. And yes, meat certainly appeared at Roman tables. But if you are an ordinary Roman, you should not assume that every evening comes with a roasted pig waiting politely for you. That would be far too generous. For many people, meat is not an everyday foundation of the diet. The reasons are practical. Animals are valuable. They provide more than food. A working animal can pull a cart. An ox can help with agriculture. A donkey can carry goods. A sheep can provide wool. Goats can provide milk. Chickens can provide eggs. So killing an animal for meat means giving up other useful things it might have provided. You stand near a Roman farm and watch the animals moving through the yard. Suddenly, the situation becomes obvious. The farmer is not looking at them and thinking only about dinner. Each animal represents labor, materials, reproduction, milk, eggs, wool, transportation, or future income. That makes meat more complicated than simply asking whether Romans liked it. Of course they liked it. Who wouldn't? The real question is whether they could afford to eat it regularly. For wealthy households, the answer could be very different. A rich Roman family might have access to a wide variety of animal foods. Pork could be especially important. So could poultry, fish, shellfish, and other meats. Game animals could appear on elite tables as well. The wealthier the household, the easier it becomes to turn food into a display of abundance. But your modest household is not a senator's villa. You look at your bowl of lentils. Suddenly, it seems perfectly reasonable. Legumes are cheaper. Grain is practical. Vegetables can be grown locally. Olives provide oil. Bread fills you. Meat becomes something you might have on special occasions, rather than something you expect every night. That does not mean you never taste it. There are many situations where meat might appear: festivals, religious sacrifices, public events, special celebrations, family occasions. markets, and perhaps a particularly good week. But ordinary meals are often built around cheaper staples. This is where ancient Roman society becomes especially interesting. Food does not just reflect wealth. It can also reflect opportunity. If you live near the coast, fish may be easier to obtain. If you live inland, different foods may dominate. If you work on a farm, your access to certain ingredients can differ from someone living in a crowded urban apartment. If you are wealthy, almost everything becomes easier. You can purchase more. You can store more. You can hire people to prepare more. You can afford to waste more. That last point is important. A wealthy household can sometimes afford inefficiency. An ordinary household cannot. You watch a servant in a rich villa carry a tray filled with food. The dishes are elaborate. There are different textures, different sauces, different ingredients, perhaps several varieties of meat. The dining room is designed to impress. Now imagine the same amount of food being placed before a poor family. It would be extraordinary. They could feed several people. The contrast is uncomfortable, and it explains why ancient descriptions of Roman cuisine can sometimes give a distorted impression. Literary sources often focus on unusual, luxurious, or extravagant meals, because ordinary porridge is not exactly thrilling material for a writer. Nobody spends 20 pages describing a perfectly normal bowl of lentils, but that bowl may have been eaten far more often than the spectacular dishes described in stories. You return to your own meal. There is no giant roast. There is no mountain of exotic food. There is simply bread, vegetables, legumes, and seasoning. And somehow, you are not disappointed, because you are beginning to understand the economics behind the plate. Now consider fish. Fish occupies a fascinating position. In coastal regions, it can be accessible, but fresh fish can also be expensive, especially high-quality varieties. Romans developed extensive fishing and fish processing industries. Fish could be eaten fresh when available. It could also be preserved. And, as you already know, it could become sauce. So even when you are not eating fish directly, you may still be eating the product of the fishing industry. That little jar of fermented sauce is connected to the sea. The empire's appetite reaches the coastline. You imagine fishermen working before sunrise. Their boats leave the harbor. The water is dark. The air is cool. They work while the city is still sleeping. Later, their catch enters the market. Some fish are sold fresh. Some are processed. Some become ingredients for sauces. The cycle continues. Now you think about poultry. Chickens and other birds can provide eggs as well as meat. Again, the animal has multiple uses. This makes household decisions more complicated. If you eat the chicken today, you lose future eggs. If you keep it alive, you may get more value over time. That is the kind of calculation that becomes invisible once food is separated from agriculture. Modern consumers usually see a package. Ancient households see an animal. The connection is immediate, and sometimes that makes meat feel like a luxury. You look at the kitchen. The cook is preparing a small amount of animal food. It is not the centerpiece. It is mixed into the meal. A little can add flavor and richness. That makes sense. If meat is expensive, you do not necessarily need a huge quantity. You can combine it with grain and vegetables. One small portion can help flavor a much larger dish. Again, efficiency. The Roman kitchen is constantly finding ways to stretch resources. You begin to wonder whether wealthy Romans even understood how unusual their food was. For them, abundance could become normal. If servants constantly refill your table, you might stop thinking about the labor involved. You might complain that a dish is too simple. You might demand something more exotic. That is when food becomes a status symbol. The more difficult an ingredient is to obtain, the more impressive it can become. Imported spices, rare fish, fine wine, exotic fruits, unusual meats. The banquet becomes a demonstration of wealth. You do not simply eat. You show everyone that you can afford to eat. This is a very old human habit. You smile slightly. Apparently, ancient Rome had food flexing too. But beneath the humor is a serious reality. The food system depends on inequality. Some people produce, some transport, some cook, some serve, some feast, and some simply hope the price of bread does not rise too much. You take another piece of bread. It suddenly seems more important than the missing meat. For an ordinary Roman, a dependable supply of grain may matter far more than occasional access to luxury. A full stomach is more useful than an impressive plate. You finish your meal slowly. The question of meat has changed the way you see the table. You no longer ask, did Romans eat meat? The better question is, who could eat meat? How often, and under what circumstances? That question leads directly into the markets. Because even if food exists somewhere in the empire, that does not mean you can afford it. The market decides what reaches your household. The merchant decides the price. The harvest affects supply. The weather affects the harvest. And your purse determines what you take home. Outside, the Roman market is already preparing for another morning. You can almost hear the carts arriving. And tomorrow, you will follow the food there. Morning arrives before you are ready for it. You wake to the sound of movement outside. A cart rattles over stone. Someone calls out from the street. A door opens, then another. The city is waking, and somewhere nearby, the Roman market is beginning another day. You step outside with a small collection of coins. Your stomach is already reminding you that yesterday's dinner is history. Today, you need food. The street feels different in the morning. The air is cooler. The sunlight has only begun to reach between the buildings. But the smell of food is already everywhere. Fresh bread, smoke, herbs, fish, olive oil, something sweet, something you cannot identify. You follow the sounds toward the market. As you get closer, the street becomes crowded. Merchants are arranging baskets. Customers are inspecting vegetables. Workers are unloading containers. Animals move through the crowd. People argue over prices. Someone laughs. Someone complains. Someone is already trying to sell you something you did not ask for. You keep walking. This is where the Roman food system becomes visible. Yesterday, you saw the finished meal. Today you see the machinery behind it. Grain arrives in sacks. Vegetables arrive in baskets. Fish arrives from the coast. Oil arrives in ceramic containers. Wine arrives in large vessels. Fruit appears when the season allows it. And meat arrives in smaller quantities than you might expect. You stop at a grain stall. The merchant has several containers nearby. Grain is one of the most important foods in the city. You look at it. It seems almost disappointingly ordinary. Just grain. But that grain is civilization. Without it, Rome has a problem. A very large problem. Cities depend on food arriving from somewhere else. And Rome is enormous. That means enormous amounts of grain must move toward the city. Ships cross the Mediterranean. Carts travel roads. Workers unload cargo. Warehouses store supplies. Markets distribute food. The system is complicated, and if something goes wrong, everyone notices. You look at the sacks again. A Roman citizen might not think about the entire chain every time they buy bread. But the chain is there. Fields, farmers, harvests, transport, storage, milling, baking, selling, eating. Every loaf represents all of it. You move toward the bakery. The smell is impossible to ignore. Fresh bread is being prepared. You watch workers handling dough. The bakery is warm. The oven is hotter still. This is one place where food production becomes almost industrial in scale. Rome has many professional bakers, particularly as urban demand grows. Bread is not simply a household side project anymore. For many city residents, it is something they purchase. You watch loaves being shaped and prepared. The work is repetitive. But repetitive does not mean easy. Someone has to prepare the dough. Someone has to manage the oven. Someone has to keep the operation supplied. Someone has to clean. Someone has to sell. The bread you eat in the evening has a long history behind it. You purchase a small loaf. It is warm. You tear off a piece. You eat it immediately. You regret nothing. Then you remember you still need the rest of your meal. You return to the market. The vegetable stalls are brighter now. Green leaves. onions, herbs, roots, fruits. You see customers selecting individual items. Nobody seems to be grabbing a huge shopping cart. There are no plastic bags. There is no refrigerated section. You buy what you can carry, and perhaps what you can afford. This makes shopping itself different. Modern grocery shopping can involve planning for an entire week. Ancient shopping may be much more frequent, especially for perishable foods. You cannot simply leave fresh fish sitting around for days. You cannot expect vegetables to remain perfect indefinitely. So markets are constantly moving food from producers and traders to consumers. The city has to keep eating every day. The merchant looks even less interested in changing it. You almost laugh. Apparently, arguing over grocery prices is another human tradition that survived perfectly well. You move on. At the fish stall, the atmosphere changes. The smell is stronger. Fresh fish lies arranged for customers. Some varieties are more desirable than others. Some are more expensive. You realize that even within one category of food there is hierarchy. There is ordinary fish. There is desirable fish. There is expensive fish. There is fish for common meals, and fish for wealthy tables. The same sea feeds different social classes differently. You keep walking. A fruit seller catches your attention. There are figs, grapes, perhaps apples or pears. Depending on the season, the colors are beautiful. You pick up a fig. It is soft, sweet. You consider buying it. Then you look at your coins. The fig suddenly becomes a philosophical question. Do you want sweetness? Or do you want enough grain and vegetables to make dinner? You put the fig down. The Roman economy has defeated dessert. For now, you purchase something more practical. A few vegetables, some legumes, bread. You still have enough for a little oil. That will make the meal much better. As you walk away, you notice something else. The market is not only selling food. It is selling information. Prices tell you what is scarce. Availability tells you what has arrived. Seasonal changes become visible. A poor harvest might mean higher prices. A good harvest might mean greater abundance. A storm at sea might affect fish. A disrupted transport route might affect imported products. You can learn about the wider world simply by watching the stalls. That is something modern supermarkets hide. When you enter a supermarket, the food usually looks stable. The shelves are full. The lights are bright. The prices are printed. You rarely think about the weather in another country while choosing tomatoes. In Rome, the connection is closer. The world outside the city is always present in the market. A bad harvest somewhere can become an empty space on a stall. A successful shipment can bring new goods. A shortage can become an argument. A surplus can become a bargain. You continue through the crowd. Then you notice the difference between buying food and obtaining food. The market gives you access, but you still need money. This sounds obvious, yet it changes everything. Food can be available and still be inaccessible. You can stand beside a basket of excellent fish and not be able to afford it. You can smell expensive spices and walk away. You can watch someone else buy a large quantity of meat while you calculate how many loaves of bread your coins could purchase. The city is full of food. That does not mean everyone eats equally. You return toward your home carrying your modest supplies. The bag is not heavy, but it represents a day's decisions. You chose vegetables instead of fruit, bread instead of meat, legumes instead of something expensive, oil because it makes everything else better. This is not a glamorous meal, but it is practical, and practical food keeps cities alive. As you walk, you pass another bakery. More bread is coming out. People are already waiting. You wonder how many loaves Rome consumes in a single day. The number must be enormous. You look at the endless movement of people. Thousands upon thousands. Perhaps more. All of them need food. Every morning. Every afternoon. Every evening. The scale becomes difficult to imagine. Rome's greatness depends partly on an invisible promise. Food will arrive. And most days, it does. You carry your supplies home. The market noise fades behind you. Your bread is still warm. You hold it carefully. For something so ordinary, It feels surprisingly important. You have learned that Roman food is not just about recipes. It is about supply, about labor, about trade, about prices, about weather, about transport, about who has money and who does not. And tomorrow, when you sit down to eat again, all of those forces will be hidden inside the meal. You reach your doorway. The city continues behind you. Another cart arrives. Another merchant shouts. Another customer bargains. Another baker pulls bread from the oven. Rome is awake, and Rome is hungry. The market is quieter now. You have returned home with your modest supplies, but the question of Roman food still follows you. You place the bread on the table, the vegetables beside it, the legumes in their clay bowl. The little vessel of oil catches the firelight. It looks simple, almost too simple. Yet you now understand how much work stands behind every piece of it. Still, there is something you have not fully considered. What happens when the harvest goes badly? You have been walking through markets where food is available. You have watched merchants weigh grain. You have seen baskets filled with vegetables. You have smelled fresh bread. It is easy to assume that tomorrow will look the same. But ancient food systems do not have the stability you are used to. A bad season can change everything. Rain can arrive at the wrong time. Rain can fail to arrive at all. A storm can damage crops. Pests can destroy plants. A harvest can simply be disappointing. And when the harvest is disappointing, the problem does not stay in the countryside. It travels. It reaches the market. It reaches your purse. Eventually, it reaches your stomach. You sit beside the small table and imagine the fields beyond Rome. Thousands of farmers are watching the sky. Their crops depend on weather they cannot control. They can work harder. They can prepare the soil. They can store grain. They can pray to their gods. But they cannot command the clouds. That uncertainty is one of the harshest realities of ancient food. Modern agriculture has enormous advantages. Irrigation, fertilizers, machinery, storage technology, refrigeration, global transportation, weather forecasting. Ancient farmers have none of these systems in their modern form. They work with what they have, and that means risk is always present. You break another piece of bread. It suddenly feels more valuable. A loaf is not merely something you eat. It is the result of a successful chain of events. The seed had to grow. The farmer had to harvest it. The grain had to survive storage. It had to reach a mill. Someone had to grind it. Someone had to turn it into dough. Someone had to bake it. Then the finished loaf had to reach you. If any part of the process fails, the price can rise. And Rome is particularly vulnerable because it is a huge city. A small village can sometimes survive through local production. A massive city cannot. Rome needs food constantly. That creates enormous pressure on the empire. Grain must move. Ships must sail. Roads must function. Warehouses must operate. Markets must remain supplied. You begin to understand why Roman authorities cared so much about grain. Bread was political. Food was political. A shortage was not just an inconvenience. It could become a crisis. You imagine walking into the market after a poor harvest. The stalls are not empty. That would be too dramatic. Instead, they are simply less full. The merchant has fewer sacks. The vegetables look smaller. Prices are higher. Customers are quieter. Everyone is calculating. You approach the grain seller. You ask the price. He tells you. You stare. Then you ask again, just in case you heard incorrectly. Unfortunately, you did not. You count your coins. The same money that bought a reasonable amount last month now buys less. This is how hunger can begin, not necessarily with an empty market. Sometimes it begins with food becoming gradually less affordable. You look around. A wealthy customer is still buying. They can absorb the higher price. You cannot. That difference becomes enormous during difficult times. The wealthy household may simply spend more. The poor household may reduce portions. They may choose cheaper foods. They may skip meat. They may rely more heavily on grain and legumes. They may borrow. They may seek assistance. The pressure moves downward. You return home with less food. The meal is thinner tonight. The lentils are still there. The bread is there, but the quantity is smaller. You eat slowly. You do not want to finish too quickly. That feeling is ancient. The uncomfortable awareness that food is limited. You begin thinking about tomorrow, before tonight's meal is finished. Should you save some bread? Should you eat it now? There is no perfect answer. You put aside a small piece. Future. You will appreciate present. Use restraint. For a moment, the kitchen is quiet. You hear people outside. The city continues. A cart passes. Someone calls from a neighboring apartment. Children laugh. A door closes. Normal life continues, even when food prices change. That is another strange feature of ancient cities. Crisis does not always look dramatic from the street. People still work. Markets still open. Bread is still baked. But everyone adjusts. You wonder how Romans understood these changes. They had experience. Bad harvests were not an abstract concept. People knew what a poor season meant. They knew that grain prices could change. They knew that weather mattered. They knew that storage mattered, and they developed strategies. One strategy was preservation. Grain could be stored. Legumes could be dried. Olives could be preserved. Fish could be salted. Grapes could become wine. Various foods could be transformed into products that lasted longer. This is one reason Roman food technology deserves more respect. Preservation is not glamorous. Nobody writes a heroic poem about a well-sealed grain store. But preservation keeps people alive. You walk toward a storage room. Large containers line the walls. The air smells dry. Grain sits safely inside. This is the ancient equivalent of an insurance policy. If the harvest is good, you store some. If the harvest is poor, you use the reserve. Of course, storage is not perfect. Pests exist. Moisture exists. Spoilage exists. Containers can break. Warehouses can be damaged. Food can be stolen. Every stored resource creates another problem. How do you protect it? You imagine a warehouse full of grain. It represents wealth. That means someone has to guard it. Someone has to manage it. Someone has to measure it. Someone has to decide when it can be released. Food becomes administration. The empire is not only moving food, it is counting food, recording food, protecting food, distributing food. And when you think about Rome this way, the city looks different. Its roads are not merely roads. They are food routes. Its harbors are not merely ports. They are supply lines. Its warehouses are not merely buildings. They are insurance against hunger. Its bakeries are not merely shops. They are part of the city's daily survival. And your dinner is the final stage. You finish the lentils. You have saved the bread. The oil has made the meal more satisfying. You are still hungry, but not desperately hungry. Tonight, that is enough. You look at the small remaining piece of bread. Tomorrow, the market may be full, or it may not. That uncertainty sits quietly in the room. And for ancient Romans, it was always there. The food on your table depends on forces far beyond your doorway. Weather, harvest, trade, politics, transportation, storage, money, all of them meet here, on your plate. You lean back. The fire is beginning to fade. Outside, Rome remains restless. But your thoughts have become slower. You realize that the brutal truth about ancient Roman food is not that every meal was disgusting. It is that every meal was fragile. A good dinner could exist because dozens of things had gone right. And when enough things went wrong, even the world's greatest city could feel hungry. You close your eyes for a moment. Tomorrow, you will return to the market. But tonight, you have learned something more important. The Roman kitchen does not begin at the kitchen. It begins in the field, in the sea, on the road, in the warehouse, and in the hands of people you will never meet. Every bite carries their labor with it.